Hello, and welcome to Big Bad Online. This panel is so you want to hire an editor, and we're just going to get it in it and do some introductions. So my name is Karen. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me at K12s across the social medias. I am an editor for both freelance for private clients, and I work a lot with Bully Pulpit and Evil Hat, among other publishers. And I'm going to pass it over to Jackie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jackie. My pronouns are he, him. And I am also a freelance editor. I also do freelance writing for other tabletop companies and games and clients. And you can find me on usually at Death by Mage. And I have worked with Evil Hat and I've worked with Paizo. I've also done writing for Wizards of the Coast and MCDM and several other publishers. And we'll pass it over to Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Punsalan. You can find me at the Dovetailer across socials. I do freelance editing and also game design. I've worked for Evil Hat, Paizo, World of Darkness, a whole bunch of others. I've had the privilege of doing that also, given that I've kind of started early in my career, I guess. And I mostly work with small publishers and individuals rather than companies when it comes to editing. My big editing thing right now, though, is with Soul Muppet Publishing from the UK. And I'll pass it down to Jen.
I'm Jen Martin. I use she, her pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at 10penjen. I have done editing for Evil Hat and Bully Pulpit. I just wrapped up a huge book for Evil Hat. I'm so excited to have turned in. And I've also done a lot of proofreading. So I'm going to give it back to Karen.
All right. So you want to hire an editor? Fantastic. We are all editors. We're here to give you some advice. So we're going to share a little bit of our experiences editing, both for a one-on-one with the game designer and through a publisher, and what that's like, and try to give some advice for what you should keep in mind when you're looking to hire an editor. But first, I think it's really important that we should talk about what the different types of editing are, because there are different categories and they're very fluid on like how you determine what. So I'm going to attempt to introduce these so we can at least kind of all get on the same page of what we're talking about. But I absolutely welcome my fellow speakers to correct me if I miss something, because again, it's a little bit different for everybody. And this is actually, I think, the most important first step if you're thinking about hiring an editor, is to know what type of edit do you want. What type of edit do you need? Those might be two different things. So it's very important to specify what you're looking for. That's also really going to affect rates. So super important. So if we start at like the kind of most involved, we would call that developmental editing. And that's, you often are working like before the game is fully written, you're working with the designer to develop the content itself. So you're thinking about like the direction and tone, the organization of the chapters. You might be looking at mechanics even and trying to revise them. So that's a very big picture, like before everything is even put on a page. Does everyone kind of agree with that? Did I miss anything on what developmental editing means to you?
No, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we would move on to a copy edit. And I'd like to think of this as saying, do the words as written convey the meaning as intended? Is this game instructing you to teach the game that you want the players to play? So is it clear? What is like the vocabulary that you're using? Again, you might look at organization of chapters and sections. You're going to make sure that like the style and voice and tone is appropriate and uniform across the board. So you're still looking at a lot of big picture things, but everything should be written at this point. And then we would move down to like a line edit. And this here, I think, is where things start to get really blended, because a line edit, you might pick up some of these things and you might make observations on like style and voice and organization. But what you're kind of being asked to do specifically is just look for grammatical accuracy and vocabulary. So you're kind of just looking at the lines. You're not worrying about too much of the bigger picture. Is that kind of falling in the same categories for everyone else?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually for line edit, that's the one where you do a lot of tooth and combing. Like this is like if you can think of editing in terms of like the how you do like a sieve or anything like that. It's like the you're getting narrow and smaller to every time you go in each of these kinds of different editing because you're going for smaller things every time.
Yeah. So then the final one, the smallest, is then the proofreading. And this is often post layout, not necessarily, but this is where you're trying to find anything that everybody else has missed by this point. Because at a certain point, you have looked at this manuscript so many times that you are getting a little snowblind from it. Or excuse me, like you're just missing things. You're not going to be able to catch everything. So this is looking for words that are misused, that are misspelled, maybe little formatting errors, page numbers, making sure page references are all in there. So so that's kind of the final looks. So what I would like to do is kind of pass it around to the rest of the panel, which is like, what types of editing do you prefer doing? Because this is another important thing. If you're looking for an editor, you want to find somebody who is most comfortable doing this type of edit. I personally am not a huge fan of developmental editing. It's just not my bag, and it's not what I like to do. I like getting things that are already written, and that's just how I prefer to work. So I tend to shy away from developmental editing jobs just because it's not what I like as much. I don't feel as confident, and I am at a position in my career when I don't feel like I need to force myself to do it to like get the experience. So I just don't. Pam, how about you? Like what do you prefer doing?
Honestly, before I got into TTRPGs editing, a lot of my editing experience was straight from the academe. So you're almost always doing developmental editing, no matter what. Like you're either developmentally editing yourself or you're doing it for a peer. Because like when they say proofread in our circles, they really mean like read the whole thing and make sure that everything is absolutely fine. So I got used to developmental editing, so it kind of became a thing of mine. And I also like copy editing a lot because those are areas where I guess as a teacher, as a former teacher, I like being able to help people get their ideas out in the best way possible. And I'm personally really bad when it comes to editing at like catching the small details especially if I've read the manuscript multiple times already and I'm kind of like what's happening. So for developmental and copy editing are the two things that I like doing the most. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, I actually like both ends of the spectrum, right? I really like proofreading. I've done a lot of it. I love like spotting that one missing space. It's like so satisfying. But I also, the book that I just turned in, I had to rearrange it, right? I had to rearrange the chapters, and it was so satisfying because it went from a book that was like maybe a little harder to read, and then just moving some chapters around and putting some things in different places made the whole thing make so much more sense. So yeah, I'll do all of it. I love words, but the big rocks and the little rocks are my favorite. What about you, Jackie?
I'm usually a big picture kind of person, so I like developmental usually the most. I always used to, for it, like even in academia, I used to a lot of my classmates and peers used to just go, okay, we put all these ideas on this big board, and it's like, okay, now I'm gonna go shuffle this around, and don't panic. And so they panic still, but I enjoy it because you can sometimes see the whole thing and you can kind of see how it will take shape. And if you're going through the whole process, and if you're actually hired through the whole process, you get to nurse it through the whole way through. So like sometimes you can kind of like go, okay, I think this might be a good place. We'll touch back again when we do some more writing and when we get more fine tuning. But if you're only getting hired for the one thing, you kind of want to make that big push in the very beginning because the developmental editing, I feel, usually is a good guideline for the writing, and it helps them get where they need to go. So that's why it's important to me. I like that the most.
I think it's so important, as you said, to you kind of warn the designer, like, brace yourself. This is going to look bad. It's not bad. I was editing Free Spacer, which is a lovely kind of sci-fi space cowboy game, and I wrote back like, "I'm so sorry, I killed all your darlings. Please forgive me," because it needed a lot of restructuring. It had a lot of very repetitive text, and I felt like I think that the reader is going to get it. So I think we need to slash out a lot of this and just make the whole thing tighter. And just explain everything once. They can go back and read it again if they didn't get it the first time. But I really did have to like warn the author, like, don't freak out. This is for your own good. Has anyone else had an experience like that where you've kind of had to really get the author to be on board with how much red line they're going to see?
The author that I was just recently working with, it wasn't so much that he wasn't getting on board. I think it's that, like, when you're going through and you're writing like a huge game, it's so big, but the designer is only really ever working on one little section at a time, right? Whereas as an editor, I'm looking at the whole text. And so I might be the first person to read the whole thing front to back. And even just those fresh eyes, I think are helpful. Because it's when you're a designer, you're like, oh, I'm going to work on this mechanic. Oh, I'm going to work on that currency. And I'm like, no, baby, it's a book. We got to go through the whole thing.
I had to handle two designers who had never had editing before, and it was also their very first game. So they were super nervous that their work would like not be good for my eyes. It wasn't that they were frightened of the idea of being edited. It was more of, I'm already anxious about my game. So if I'm anxious about my game and my editor figures something out, like, do I have to change everything? Like, oh gosh, right? So there was that like kind of gentle handholding of like, it's okay, you can ask me any questions you want. Like, I like being able to talk with my designers and telling them, okay, I see your work. Can you locate certain parts of your work that you're worried about? And just be totally honest with me on what your goalposts are here, like who's your audience, etc. And if you don't know, then let's talk it through, because it's just so much easier to do that. So I always give the customary warning of I'm really going to go through this with a red pen, but I'm also going to throw in a lot of comments of like, this is so cool, because I think it helps like for a lot of the clients I get. And I've apparently gotten 5-star reviews from some people where they're like, yeah, you should hire Pam because she's always going to be your first hype man as an editor. You're never going to see the comments in the final manuscript, but at least somebody else was like, yay, your game's so cool, right? So
I love
so
leaving these
important.
comments. It's my favorite. Like,
Yeah.
just solid gold. Please keep this.
Yeah, when you're getting to see something and you're going, oh, this sounds really cool. I really like that. And I think that's the thing that sometimes an editor should have the indulgence. I think that's like an indulgence for editors, is really just to have that moment to say, hey, this is really cool. I loved reading this. So like, keep doing this.
Yeah, it like more of this, less of the other thing. And I think I often encourage the author to like, don't read through with changes showing. Like, maybe just look at it without changes showing, so you're not like overwhelmed with, because sometimes it like makes it hard to even parse a sentence. If I've switched a lot of things around, I'm not necessarily, deleting a whole sentence and putting a new one in. Sometimes I do if I think it just makes it easier to track. But I often encourage people, like, just read the whole thing as my suggestions. And that is what they are. I always welcome authors, like, if you don't like any of these changes, just let me know why. And then, if I feel like there's a grammatical reason why it's really important, then maybe I'll advocate for it. But otherwise, like, it's still your game. And as your editor, I want your game to be the best game possible. Like, as Pam said, we are going to be your hype person and be excited, and we want to make this game good because our name is on it too now. So we also are invested in making this a really good product. Some water. But I
Yeah,
will.
sometimes when I first got into editing, I had this idea that authors felt like the relationship with an editor had to be sort of adversarial or antagonistic, right?
Yeah.
Because like as a designer, like I feel really, special about my words that I write, and somebody coming along and wanting to delete them is like scary. But actually, yeah, editors are your friend. They will make your book better, and they want to help you.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very true. I feel like because I as a writer and an editor on both sides, like when I get edits back, I always look forward to them because I get to see the different interpretation or perspective of the editor and
Yeah.
how they see it, how they want to guide
Yeah.
it. And
Mhm.
it's good to have those viewpoints because sometimes you may not always agree with all of them, but sometimes we get to a point where you're like, that actually sounds a lot better than what I wrote before, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that. So it's
Mhm.
like, and so it's good to have those fresh set of eyes to have that because like when you're working on something and you're like very narrow focus and all you see is that same blank page for like the last X amount of hours, days, weeks, and you get to that point where you're like, all right, I'm done. There's 400 pages. I don't know what I wrote.
Right? Well, let's talk about the process a little bit because again, that's something that's different depending on, what the project needs, if you're working directly with the designer, or if you are working through a publisher and you're like freelancing for the publisher. So let's talk about the process a little bit and we can kind of compare and contrast how it is because that's another important thing when you're looking for an editor. So one, know what type of edit you need. And two, like be aware of what that process is and what you can expect because it might be more involved than you think it is. And if you don't want it to be, you should probably say that first because you want everybody to be on the same page and have the same expectations. And again, this is all going to be reflected in the cost of the editor. So you want to keep these things in mind based on what you're looking for. So I would say, like for me, if I'm working with just the designer, I definitely, first of all, I like to edit it pre any type of layout, in Word or in a Google Docs so we can have comment threads. So, those are the easiest ways to track changes. It's you can do it in InDesign, but it's harder to follow. It's a little bit harder to parse. And like that first edit is going to be a lot. It's going to be all the comments and questions. It's going to be all the edits. And then there's going to be maybe one or two rounds where you would go through, correct everything, that looks good to you, raise other questions. We might have some back and forth. If I said like, this is unclear, what do you mean? And like, we have to kind of work together to figure out, well, how does this sentence work? And then once we've gone back and forth with that, like at least once, depending on how much additional writing and revisioning you needed to do, I like to see it again after layout because I will catch things that I didn't see before when it is formatted differently. And it's another reason why I like personally to both read it on my computer and then print it out. And it just makes a big difference in what my eyes are able to catch. And then if it goes through proofreading, I want to look at the proofreader's notes too. They're going to find a lot of cool things, but they also might not be as familiar with the text as I am. So I might kind of veto some of their suggested corrections because I'm like, no, that's actually not what was meant here. Um, and that's like the process that I like to do. Both if I'm working with a publisher, like that's pretty much the process that we do at Evil Hat, and if I'm working directly with the designer. But for example, with Bully Pulpit, a lot of times Steve has already edited things, and
Yeah.
Jason's a great writer. They don't need me that much. It's really a line edit proofread type of thing. It's already laid out, and I might raise some questions and that's it. I send it back, they do their thing, they don't give it back to me for anything. So it's very quick. And I think partially is just like the quality that it's already in by the time it comes to me.
Also, it's pretty short text too.
It's
Like
so
they're not
short. Yeah.
putting out 100,000 word books, right? So
Yeah. It's very different when it's short. Like Jen, so what is your process when you edit? or when you
Yeah.
used to?
Yeah, I've done. I only just did my first like big edit very recently, and Karen, as you know, I often proofread books that you've edited.
Yeah.
So we sort of pass it back and forth. But yeah, so for proofreading, I will look at it after layout. It may still be missing some art and whatnot, but that's fine. And I will put all my comments in a Google Doc. I'll say what page, what line, and then whatever my notes are, and then hand that back to the editor, and the editor will be like yes, no, maybe. And that's proofreading is fairly straightforward. I don't really ever do a second pass for proofreading. I have on at least one book because I was seeing text before the editor saw text, and that felt very weird. That process was a little backwards.
Yeah, that is weird.
But yeah. But yeah, so my process for editing is very similar to yours because the book I edited was for Evil Hat. So
Yeah.
So I can talk a little bit about how we do things with Unbreakable, because usually what we do is we have a writer and an editor assigned together to work. So we have the editor is actually a developmental editor to work alongside the writer to help them get their ideas together, because sometimes a lot of our contributors are first time writers, and so they never had a whole lot of experiences, and so it's very important for us to make sure that they have somebody who can give feedback on ideas and be able to help them answer questions. And then they will usually handle that phase of editing, and they'll do the developmental editing. They'll do a bit of copy editing, and then that revision copy will go to that draft will go to usually a sensitivity consultant or reader, and then that feedback will be relayed to both the editor and the writer, because they'll be in the same chain. Because we want the editor involved to make sure that they understand what the feedback is looking for, so that they can also help the writers as well. And then from that point on, once that's been cleared, the editor clears it with us that it's been set to the style guides that we've set, and then it's handed off to myself or our editor in chief, who then do like a big line and proofread edit. So like. Jazz will usually do like the line edits, and then I will do a proofread after the initial layout has been set, and I'll do a big proofread because I usually have to do the final front matter anyways. So I usually just read it all in one go, and I can just see how it looks all together and make any notes and comments usually. So that's like how we usually handle things. So we actually have like different editors for different stages, but. So that's how we do it with Unbreakable. I know I've done it with some other publishers where it's been more of I get hired for one stage. Sometimes it takes there'll be some time in between, and then I'll come back, and then sometimes it gets morphed into something that I did not remember seeing as before, and I'm just going, okay. This is different. That's fine. And then, but then usually most of the time I'll see is usually like developmental editing and a lot of copy editing from that stage, because I usually prefer those type of work. Proofreading is something that I don't do as often. I do them, but I don't do them as often. And I feel that the thing about the process is that sometimes it could also get rearranged, because for Fate of Umdar, I got asked to do the copy editing for the playtest material first, because it was already written, and I just had to give some feedback about the grammar, the writing, the styling, and I said that we'll come back for like the bigger organizational changes, because that'll be for like the actual book itself. So that's where you can see as an editor it can change. So you really do need to know what your needs are.
Yeah, because after playtesting, they could be changing all kinds of things. So you don't necessarily need to be going in there with that level of edit. You just want it to be cleaned up enough for a playtest friendly copy.
Right.
My experience has been I miss one stop shop for everything from developmental all the way down to proofreading. A lot of the independent designers who have hired me tend to give me just 2 passes. So like the first one where we just get everything out there, and then after that it's like, hey, it's been layouted, like here you go. Occasionally they'll give me like a step in the middle where they're still editing it before layout and they want to make sure that they understood all of the instructions I gave them correctly, or they have more questions, or they had like other things that they're concerned about. But usually it's just like once for everything, literally everything, and then a second time for are we all clear? Do we have anything else that needs to be done? And my experience with editing short stuff is very limited because I'm usually the one that people hire for their 100 to 500 page books. So it's a lot, but it's also super fun because they tend to be original systems rather than hacks. So like on a design level, it's inspiring to see, and it's kind of nice because like RPGC didn't used to have a lot of big books, and the initial big books were passed to me because I was one of the only editors out there that was really connected with the community for a while. So that was cool. So I guess that's more or less my process. Soul Muppet is very similar to Evil Hat. They have that whole one pass thing, and they tell you exactly what they need, and then they put it through layout, and they get back to you after. So that's me.
Cool. So we had a really good question about style guides. And I think that's an important thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is what is a style guide and why do you need one? Which could have been its own panel.
Really, it really could. It really
So
could.
a style guide or a style sheet, they're often used synonymously, which is what I will do here rather than nitpick the difference because I forgot the difference between the two of them. But it is a list of terms, both rules of like Oxford comma, yes or no. Are you going to spell out numbers 0 through 9 and use digits, 10 and up? Does it apply for stats as well, or just when people are talking? Do you spell out those numbers when you're doing like actual play example quotes? There's going to be things about formatting style of like, cool. So, for example, Evil Hat likes to put some type of term formatting like bold the first time you introduce a game specific term. But then after that, you don't. Some people like having that formatting the whole way through. And then you have, a whole list of vocabulary of what do you capitalize? Do you capitalize the moves? Do you capitalize the word hit points? And then there's basic vocabulary of is role playing 1 word, 2 words, hyphenated? What are you gonna pick? And as an editor, personally, like I don't need to fight for which one you choose, like for role playing, but I need to make sure it's the same the whole way through. So when I am editing, I am often tasked with building that style guide based on the patterns that I'm seeing the most.
Same. Yeah, that's been the experience too. Yeah.
And I'll say, this is what I see the most. We're just going to go with that. Is that cool? Like before I go through and make all those tiny changes, I show it to the designer and say, do you disagree with any of these? And we might go back and forth. I might make some points of like, I don't think that we need to capitalize the word move because I think everyone is familiar enough with that term that we don't need to capitalize that as a special word. So I don't like too many words over capitalized in my text. That's what I try to push through is make things a little cleaner. So a style guide is that whole list of vocabulary and nitpicky rules about the grammar and the formatting that the proofreader needs as well, because that's part of their final checks is making sure to go through and make sure that everything aligns with that. So here we get to tell the fun style guide stories that people have. What are other people's experiences with making your own or coming in and maybe you're working with a publisher that has one already, which is always amazing.
Oh, that is the blessing. That is that when you have when they hand you a style guide along with the rest of the with everything else, and you as an editor just have to smile and be happy because you just know it's like at least a third of the work is already done. You don't have to stress about things because it's all rules. These are rules and formatting, so you can kind of go, okay, if it's not formatted, then you know that when you make the call to say, like this suggestion of we should probably change it to fit this style guide, that at least you have something to back you up. And it's like, and if there is a reason that the designer needs to make, to not go with the style guide, then at least you have that conversation. So you still get the important part of, okay, now we know why, and now I can just ignore the rest of this. And it's like, and so it's very much like a key. It helps you figure out what you need to do very quickly. And then it moves you along. So especially if you're copy editing, it moves you along super fast, and then you can focus on things like tone and word usage and things like that, and not so much on the more technical elements that sometimes you may get held up on. And so there's that. And I will say, from developing our own, especially for Unbreakable, that one took a little while because we branched from just one style guide to like incorporating other elements, because we were going to focus on different types of game systems, and so we needed to really make it a bigger style guide. Thankfully, it was still 2 pages, but still.
Yeah. I did some proofreading some time ago for an Eclipse Phase supplement, and they had phenomenal, amazing style guide. So many technical sci-fi terms. I didn't even know what these were. And most of them did not appear in what I was looking at, but they had something that went just across their entire, Eclipse Phase universe of terms, which was amazing. So thank you so much. Jen, how about you with style guides?
Yeah, I think a style guide can also be super helpful to a designer, because I'm like you, Karen. I don't want to capitalize every single thing that could be maybe capitalized, because I think it sort of fatigues the reader. And so as an editor, if I'm building a style guide and I have a list of words that I never capitalize and a list of words that I capitalize, and if one of these things is much longer or shorter than the other, it's like a signal to me to be like, hey, maybe we should change this a little bit. Because when you capitalize everything, it's not doing what you think it's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, just makes the whole sentence sound unnatural because you're emphasizing too many words. Pam, you were saying?
My experiences are pretty much the same as all of you. I tend to just go wild on the suggestion button. So I'll tell my client once, like, okay, terms like this, maybe you should boldface it. And to give them an idea, I'll just go through every single term just to show them how to do it. But that's, again, because a lot of these designers have never dealt with an editor before. They also have no style guide, and it's kind of like training, so that when they go to another editor or they come back to me, then it's overall less work for everyone, and they're also getting a sense of their own voice, which is pretty cool.
You do often do a little bit of project management of like, okay, I'm going to walk you through the phases that at least you need me for. And then I will send you along your way. But you might not be familiar with like all the things that you need to do right now because it's not a single pass. There was a really good question here of what you should look for when scouting a potential editor. Are there any red flags to watch out for? I think that's a great question, is like, how do you find an editor? Because I've often had people approach me out of the blue, and I love this because they've said, I saw your name on other games that I really like. And I think that would be my advice, is pay attention to who's editing the games that you like.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're available.
Yeah.
Sometimes I am, and I'm happy to work with people. I've had people just kind of message me or email me and say, hey, I have this thing. If it's long enough or short enough, it fits in my schedule. I'd be down. So make sure that they're editing the types of games that you like, that you want to play. You can absolutely look for people's portfolios online if they have something, but I think also just like take the books off of your shelf or open those PDFs and look in the credits page. What would other people say? What are like red flags that you would tell people, like, oh, don't hire that editor?
Honestly, for me, I don't really have any red flags in mind, because I do agree that people really should pay attention. And this is also a note to myself from like past Pam, who never paid attention to any of this with any of her literature. But like, take a look at it. If you like the game, go for that editor. The only like red flag, I guess, that I'd have is if they're very slow with getting back to you, or they don't seem enthusiastic about the project. Maybe it's time to just like cut as clean as possible and pull out, because there are so many other editors that would be willing to work with you. So it's always good to kind of have a sit down and say, this is the kind of work that I like doing, and this is my first time. Like, set expectations, and if you see that some of those expectations are not being met, or that you have to compromise a bit too much, then perhaps it's time to find another editor. So it's not really a red flag. It's for me, it's more of like give some suggestions, be upfront, because the more communicative you are, the easier it is. And if somebody's not meeting you halfway, there's so many other people out there that you can go to.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Is you want to find somebody who's working well with you. If you're not happy with this, you're not having fun, find another editor.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people also just have different styles. I've learned that there are some designers who write great games, but I am not the editor for them because their
Yes,
process
yeah.
is different than my process. And we
That's
had to
true.
learn that the hard way. And I was like, oh, you know what? We are not meant to work together. So we're just going to get through this because we're already at the end. But like, you need a different type of process for your editor because what I'm offering is not exactly what you're needing.
Right.
No hard feelings.
Jackie, you wanted to say something about that?
I think the only thing I would add to that is just like, because every editor is gonna have their own process and they do work a little bit differently, and you as a designer also will work differently, and so you kind of need to there has to be some point where it's like the talk of like, okay, this is the process that you as the designer are implementing, and then so that way you can see how the editor can fit into your process. And sometimes it's not a good fit; it just won't work, and then you just have to go, okay, well, we'll have to either try some other things some other time, or it's just not going to work out at all, and that's okay. I mean, that's what happens. I will say that like that is probably one of those things, like if, like as Pam said, like if they're not communicating much at all, I think that's a good sign of like you move to another editor, but end this nicely and then move on to another editor.
Yeah, you should be clear about your timeline of how fast you need things back, and also understand that timeline also folds in how much time you need to do revisions.
Yeah.
So be very clear about when you need things, because you might find somebody who's totally down, but they just don't have the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might not have the time right then, but they're like, I'm wrapping something up. I could start in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And maybe you can make that work or maybe not. Jen, how about you? What are some like red flags or advice you would give folks?
Yeah, I think for me, red flag would be like if they're not communicative, or if you get back your first draft and there's not a lot of sort of red pen or suggestions or feedback, right? And the other thing for me, if I was hiring an editor for my design work, if they came back to me and said, oh, sure, I can get this 100,000 word book done in a week or 2 weeks, I would be like,
no.
Nope.
That's a concern. That is
because it takes time,
Yeah.
right? And if somebody tells me that they're going to get it done that fast, that tells me they're not actually going to look that deeply into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it? You can have it done well, fast, or cheap, but you can only
that's right.
Yeah.
You don't want it fast.
You don't want it fast. No. I mean, I can tell from my personal experience when I edit, I will read a manuscript at least a dozen, if not more times.
Yeah.
Because you don't catch everything with the first pass. You don't catch it the second, definitely not the third. And you're going to keep going until you get to the point where it's like, all right, I think my eyes are going to just incinerate. And I think we made it. All right. I think we're at a place.
Yeah. Yeah. We read it more than once. We read it again and again and again. Even before we, might give you back the first pass. So we're at the 10-minute warning. We have some really great questions in the chat, but I will say one of them is asking about rates. And Jen and I were actually on a panel in Big Bad Online last year where we talked about this a little bit, and you can find that on YouTube. But some of us will be hopping over to the Discord post-chat channel, and we can talk about some of those things then. So I'm going to pass on that question. And I want to kind of hear from everybody, like, what is the one piece of advice that you would give, like the most important thing that you would give to a designer? And if you could sum it up in a sentence or so, mine would be, don't work on the draft and giving it to me to edit. Take a vacation.
Golden rule of editing right there.
Please.
You want version control errors? That's how you get version control errors. Don't do it. Take a break. Work on art. Work on literally anything else. but that is really going to slow down the whole process if you are making corrections that then I have to see and fold back in again, and we're going to get so many version problems. So please, like, respect the there's one ball passing back and forth, and when I have it, you don't have it, and when I give it to you, I don't have it. I wait to hear from you. Jackie, what would be like your one piece of advice?
My one piece would be to be clear. If you're the publisher, be clear about what kind of editing needs are for your project. So when you're hiring your editor, be clear of what those needs are, so that your editor can actually do the job for you and do the right thing. Because I easily see people always ask, like, I just need an editor, but what kind of editor? I need to be specific, because all those different kind of edits we talked about have different skills involved, and you need to know. And sometimes every editor has different strong suits and different preferences, and so you should definitely hone in on those. So that's my one piece of advice there. And Jen, how about you?
Yeah, so if you have like more than 50 pages or so, like I always would love to see a style guide. And what I want designers to realize is, like, you get to decide, you define your own rules. As an editor, I don't care which words are capitalized. It's my job to make sure that if you want it capitalized, it's always capitalized. So like, yeah, as a designer, you get to make your own rules, but then tell me so I can keep it consistent.
Yeah.
I think my only piece of advice, is everybody's already shared what I would have said, is like, be not afraid. Just talk to me, please. Like, you don't have to just like give me the document and wait and vibrate in anxiety. Like, tell me if something is up, tell me what you need. And also remember that the more you add that you didn't tell me, I'm going to be that person in the room. I'm going to charge extra. So the clearer we are from the get-go at every step, the better for everybody, because I really don't mind doing extra favors as long as it was clear from the get-go that that's what you needed and that's what you wanted.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And again, like, kind of what we've all been saying is, we are here to be your number one fan, but it is still your baby, and we want to respect that. We're going to give a lot of suggestions and advice, but you can absolutely disagree. But it's so helpful to explain why, so that we're not saying, oh, maybe they missed this correction, I'm just going to make that edit again. Like that. We don't want to, do that and make it seem like we're ignoring you. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. It is, yeah, as Pam said, like, just talk to us about it, about however you're feeling. There was another question that, again, I think is really good and was talked about in last year's panel. But again, we can go to the Discord chat and talk about it more, which is, what do you do when you find something that falls outside the scope of editing but should be changed, like problematic content, or you need a sensitivity reader? Because that is a different job. That is a different person, a different skill, and different rates, very different rates for that. So I think that we could get into that in a little bit more detail, but part of that just comes from, as an editor, making gentle suggestions whenever we see things. And it can be very hard, but you do need a delicate touch, just as giving any feedback. We do try to be gentle, especially with problematic content, because we don't want to come out as like accusatory. Like, there's a lot of things that people they didn't know. They didn't know that term or that art would like reflect certain things. And so it's important to raise those questions, but also hopefully the author can be open towards it. Any thoughts from the other group on that? I know we don't have time to like kind of go into too many stories, but I think it is something really important to touch on.
I always just flag it. But like on my end, I do offer cursory advice if it is an area as a sensitivity reader or a cultural consultant that I am familiar with. So I'll just add like 2 sentences and say, okay, this is bad, or take it out. This is why. If you need more, we can talk, or I can give you another consultant. That's as far as I'll go. So I'll always point it out. Like I won't, but I will also say, like, this is kind of beyond my scope. Or I'll say, I could do this, but this is a conflict of interest because I'm also your editor. So it might be better if you get somebody else on board for this. So that's how I kind of handle it.
Yeah, same. I've had to do that before too. I've had to say, the sensitivity reader cannot be me. because I'm already editing this. So
Yeah.
we will probably need to find somebody else to sensitivity read so that there's no bias involved.
Yeah, that's really important. And the more eyes, the better.
Yeah. More eyes is always good.
I've found a couple of times where, I'm going to edit and there's just like a lone word that is like, maybe this could be read uncharitably, or, and when it's a simple case like that, I'll just be like, I think we should use a different word here because this, right?
Mhm.
And like, they don't need to hire a sensitivity expert, for like just using one incorrect term.
Yeah.
But if the game is about an area, that needs that, then yeah, I will recommend it. But yeah, just like Pam, I'll always flag it. But if it's more than a word or two here or there, then we're gonna call out that we need another expert on the field.
Yeah, because if it needs something that big, that should have happened in the developmental phase, because oftentimes you have to go back to the beginning and rewrite a lot. If it's not just something that we as an editor can say, hey, why don't you just use a different word? Like if it's in our scope, great. But it will set the project back if we say, like, actually, we need a full review of this. So cool. Well, we are running out of time, but I want to say just thank you so much, Pam and Jen and Jackie, for joining me for this lovely discussion. I find sometimes I don't always, get to see and talk to other editors, so it's always really cool for me to connect with other people in the business. But I would love to go around and have everyone again kind of say, where can people find you, and what is something that you've been working on recently that you're really excited about or just wrapped up maybe, and everyone can do a little plug. Jen, how about you to start?
Yeah, Jen Martin, you can find me at 10penjen on Twitter, 10penjen.com. I've been working on Desperation for Bully Pulpit Games, which is crowdfunding now at bit.ly/Desperation RPG.
It's on GameFound, right?
GameFound, yeah. Not quite funded yet, but maybe this week.
Getting there.
Yeah. Jackie, what about you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Jackie Leung. You can always find me at Death by Mage. For recent project, I did Improv for Gamers second edition with Karen. So
Jackie was
that just got wrapped up really nicely. So we
Mhm.
got that. But I also was the editor for Fate of Umdar. So the playtest is out now. So if you want to go check that out, go on Evil Hat and check out that playtest. And I actually just a setting that I wrote for Eldritch Sands is now available on DriveThru RPG as well. So if you want to see my writing as well, you can also see that there as well. So post-apocalyptic sci-fi, think like Bubblegum Gumshoe meets something along the lines of like Big O, kind of in that vein.
Oh,
like
cool.
little mystery, little horror as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Pam?
I'm Pam Punzalan. You can find me at The Dovetailer. I have 2 projects that I'm very excited about. The Dagger Isle supplement is in internal playtesting now, so that's pretty cool. Lots of life stuff has happened, so it's been lots of little wink wonk things, but please look forward to it. Also, Fate of Umdar, I was a sensitivity reader and I did some content for it, so I'm super excited to see how that goes. And finally, the PBTA game that my partner and I made, Nevatham's End, is in layout, so we will finally be able to release it this month, I hope. So look forward to it.
Oh, awesome. And again, my name is Karen 12s. You can find me at K12s on the social medias. I am very excited for Improv for Gamers, which just wrapped up its crowdfunding, which is my other project where I take my 2 hobbies and I mash them together. And you can find more on improvforgamers.com, but that also just funded on GameFound. And Jackie was my lovely editor on that. And I think there's even more conversations to be had about what happens when you as an editor are in the author role, and what is that like. Hopefully it was good. I tried to be really respectful, but because it is tempting to try to do both.
Yeah.
But that is it. We are out of time. Again, you can join us on the Discord for more questions and chat, and enjoy the rest of your con. So long, everybody.